Hey guys, welcome back to the Healing Unfiltered podcast. It is the first Monday of the month, and if you don't know what that means, well, I'm about to tell you. It is our hot take episode of the month. I'm super excited about this topic. I have my notes ready because I know, even if it's not a hot take episode, I get pretty fired up. And this is one that I don't want to ramble on because I really want the message to drive home. Today, we are going to talk about how you need to stop over identifying with your thoughts. And I'm saying this with tough love. Your brain is like a content machine. Your brain is like the worst version of scrolling through TikTok or Instagram or Facebook and seeing the most random shit that means absolutely nothing a lot of the time. Or it takes a glimmer of something that might mean something actually and expands it into something it doesn't need to be. And so, what I want you to take from this is that not every thought that crosses your mind deserves your full attention, might not even deserve your attention at all. And I have so many people in my life. I've worked with clients where we've worked on this. Obviously had conversations in my personal life with loved ones where they just give so much attention to their thoughts. And a lot of times I want to shake them and be like, dude, you're wasting your energy. That doesn't need to mean anything to you. You are ascribing meaning to that thought. And all you need to do with it is say, huh, that was weird, and throw it out the window. But we're going to get riled up today because a lot of people like to overanalyze. And one of the struggles that I have with pop psychology and the state of psychology, I guess, today in pop culture is we love a good analysis session. We love to conceptualize, we love to find meaning in things. And being someone who really loves to find meaning in things, I totally empathize with it. I'm annoyed with myself when it comes to this culture because I get so sucked into what does this mean? What does this say about me? What does this say about this person? What is this criteria? I think it's a natural part of being a therapist is we're so curious about that meaning. But the reason I get annoyed with it in our like pop psychology culture is because we're ascribing meaning to things that don't need meaning. And then those things then kind of run rampant in our brain and cause mental health issues. So, if you are somebody who really likes to analyze, I'm not saying stop analyzing. I'm not saying stop being curious. But what I am saying is we need to be a little more intentional about it, especially when it comes to our thoughts. If you have a really fucked up thought, do we need to take a moment and say, huh, what was that? Sure, maybe. But if you know you're prone to intrusive thoughts and you have a fucked up thought, you might be able to just say, we need to move on from that. We don't need to add more fuel to that fire. Or if you're really anxious, you might have a thought that pops in your brain. What if this? What if that? This is probably the most common that I see. It's like, I'm thinking of all the possibilities that could happen. Or imagine if somebody gets mad at me for this. Or imagine if I do this thing wrong. Why are we entertaining those thoughts and not the thoughts that could actually help us? So we're going to dive into this. I'm already fired up. We're only a couple minutes into the episode. But the main thing that I want to start off with emphasizing is that a lot of times we're spiraling on thoughts for absolutely no reason at all. Spiraling in general is not productive. We start in one place and we end up in another, and where we end up actually ends up causing us harm. And so what I hope to kind of portray with this is not only like teaching you to be a little more intentional with how you analyze your thoughts or how you identify with your thoughts, but also how can we get out of that spiral and how can we prevent that spiral from taking over to a point where it's damaging our mental health when it's just not productive, and we could be feeling a whole hell of a lot better if we didn't engage in some of those thought processes. Okay, so let's talk about this trap of over identifying with our thoughts, because even if I'm fired up, even if I'm annoyed, I understand it. I think I'm annoyed because I do get how easy it is to fall into this trap. I've been a victim of it. I've known so many people to be a victim of it. And I want us to be better about it. I want us to be more intentional as a group, as a collective society, to be more intentional and stop over identifying so much. Let's look at what over identifying with your thoughts is. Over identifying with your thoughts is when you take a thought and you view it as a fact, or you view it as an extension of your identity, an extension of who you are as a person. And the problem with this is, well, we'll start with that first part of it. Our thoughts are not facts. Our thoughts, even opinions, our thoughts sometimes aren't even opinions. You can have a thought that pops in your head that is completely opposite from what you think, feel, believe about something else. And so when we say your thoughts are not facts, quite honestly, sometimes your thoughts might just be a random neurological firing that caused your brain to think a certain thing that has nothing to do with who you are or what you believe. But we take them as facts, we take them as something and ascribe this meaning to them. And that's where over identifying comes from. When we view our thoughts as an extension of our identity, this is where it can be really damaging too. Because I mentioned intrusive thoughts a couple minutes ago. Let's say I have an intrusive thought about, I don't know, crashing my car, right? Like that's a really common intrusive thought. Like, what would happen if I did this? Do I want to crash my car? No. Am I feeling suicidal? No. These are all things we have to check in with, of course. I'm not minimizing these thoughts when it comes to that area of mental health because that's very different than an intrusive thought that I'm talking about or referring to right now. So if it is a situation where it's like, no, this is actually something for me, I'm actually in danger, I'm actually at risk of harm, of course, please pay attention to these thoughts, analyze them, talk to somebody who can help you figure out how to get out of that thought pattern. What I'm talking about is when you have a thought that is so detached from your own perspective or what you really would want to do. If we view those thoughts as an extension of our identity, let's say again, that intrusive thought of, what would happen if I crashed my car? If I viewed that as an extension of myself, I might be like, shit, am I safe to drive? I shouldn't be trusted with a vehicle. No, it's just a thought. It's just a neural zap in your brain that sends a signal to think these words that put together in a sentence. So I think when we over identify with our thoughts and we look at them as facts or we look at them as some sort of meaning as a part of our identity or who we are taking ourselves so much further from trusting our gut and knowing what our gut actually is telling us, which is honestly one of the biggest themes I've been working on with clients in therapy lately is how do I recognize my gut and why don't I listen to my gut? This is one of the reasons why you don't, is you're over identifying with your thoughts. Anyway, this I need my notes because I could go on so many tangents. But one, it gets us farther away from our gut. And two, it gets us farther away from self-awareness of just who we are as people. And those two things in general lead to so many mental health struggles. If I can't trust my gut, how am I going to make decisions that feel most effective in my life? How am I going to know when I need to set a boundary if it makes somebody else uncomfortable if I can't trust my gut? If I don't have self awareness, if I don't know who I am in terms of my identity, how am I going to feel happy in my life? Right. So these are things that I think we need to pay attention to because we might just laugh it off as, oh, I just have these anxious thoughts or I just have these intrusive thoughts. But if we're not actually looking at how these thoughts are impacting us, then we're doing ourselves a disservice because we're not able to really get to the bottom of what is impacting our mental health as a whole. Okay. So that is how we're defining over identifying in this context. Some of the things that we fall into are these patterns of I think it, therefore it must be true. I've talked about emotional reasoning before, like I feel it, therefore it must be true, especially since our thoughts and feelings do go so hand in hand in the sense that they emphasize each other. If I have a thought, that might trigger an emotion. And if I struggle with emotional reasoning, well, that's going to further prove to myself that this thought is a fact. So we really have to be aware of this concept of my thoughts are not facts and my emotions are not facts. We need to also talk about the brain's desire for control and the brain's desire to make sense of things. So, like I mentioned earlier in the beginning of this episode, it's really natural to analyze. It's really natural to want to find meaning. We are curious by nature. We want things to make sense. That's not just a societal thing. That's how our brains are wired. Our brains want the solution, our brains want the answer. We feel like we cannot be at a state of steady calm without having the answer. And so when we feed into these moments, when these thoughts pop in, our brains latch onto that and say, okay, this is where we're going to get the answer. Our brains, I've said before, for as smart as our brains are, they're really not that smart. I say that very lightly. What I mean by that is they're very efficient, and sometimes that will overpower instinctual feeling or things that can actually help us make meaningful sense of things because our brain is going to look for the fastest solution to the problem and it's going to overpower anything else that might take us some time to slow down, especially when emotions are involved. And so when we think about that, what I want you to take from this is your brain is going to look for the fastest outcome, the most practiced outcome because our brains want efficiency. And so if you are practicing over identifying with your thoughts, your brain is going to find comfort in that, even if the emotion isn't comfortable. And your brain is going to gravitate towards that in the end because it thinks, okay, this thought, this feeling, I get my answer. Even if it's not an accurate answer, your brain is going to trick yourself into thinking that it is because it wants efficiency. With that being said, to get out of that loop, it's going to feel really freaking hard because you're going against the grain. You're going against a system that wants efficiency. And by doing so, you are interrupting that efficiency. So, why it's important to note that is because just because it's hard doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Just because your brain is telling you that thought is true, that thought is true, that thought is true, doesn't mean you shouldn't fight against it, doesn't make that thought more true. It's just your brain fighting against wanting to get out of that comfort zone, get out of that efficiency. So that's really important to understand because it's going to crave the thing that keeps you safe. And if it has learned that I find the answers this route by over identifying with my thoughts, it's going to learn that that's what keeps you safe is being hyper aware and going down these spirals of what ifs. That's not what keeps you safe in the long run. Your brain is not what keeps you safe. Your learned experiences, sure, but sometimes our learned experiences even are tainted because they're so skewed from that fight or flight response. So we really need to be able to take a step back and look at what's the reality of the situation, what's the reality of my past experience. Do they go hand in hand? If yes, we take what we need from that, but it's not an all or nothing thing. We really need to rewire our brains to stop giving so much credit to the thoughts that just pop in our head on a random Tuesday of a random month of a random year, because those thoughts are going to be different every single time. And even if our brain thinks we're being efficient, it's actually causing us more distress, more cortisol, more negative emotional experiences. And we got to get out of that trap. Okay, so let's look at where these things most frequently pop up. Obviously, we've mentioned anxiety. So, those what if thoughts. Anxiety is forward thinking. Anxiety is what's going to happen in the future. What if I'm not ready? What if something goes wrong? It's all the what ifs. So, when we over identify with those what if thoughts, we are assuming that every worry that we have is a prediction. We are basically assuming that we are psychic. Our brain has a what if thought and its efficient functioning says, oh, that what if thought means you are predicting the future. You know that that's going to happen. Now, when I say it like that, that sounds really silly, right? I mean, I'm not psychic. I don't know if any of you are. If you are, that's really freaking cool. But majority of the people that I know, actually everyone I know is not psychic. We cannot predict the future. And so we're giving our brain that assumption that we can. That's really fucking with us. So anxiety in this context of over identifying with anxious thoughts is teaching our brain that we can predict the future and that that is a fact that we can predict the future and that all these what if thoughts are in fact a fact, not correct. We can see this also in low self-esteem. So some of the thoughts that we might over-identify with, especially when it comes to identity, is believing that we are less than, being very self-critical on ourselves. And then again, looking at, well, I suck at this. That means I must be a shitty person. Okay, brain wants efficiency. Yep, that's true. You're a shitty person. Again, when I say it out loud, that sounds like you would never say that to somebody else. You would never, want to say that to yourself. But because your brain is looking for that most efficient solution, it's going to latch onto that. It's going to see that and go, all right, we're recording this is what we believe about ourselves. And if that's what we're recording is what we believe about ourselves, then that is the fact. No. Okay. And the problem with it being so efficient is then it's going to be really hard to get out of. So when we over identify with that, especially in terms of identity, you are solidifying that that is how you view yourself and that is what you believe about yourself. And then you are solidifying that that will show up in your relationships, in your life, in other areas of your aspect when it does not have to. That's the thing here. You can take so much power back if you stop over identifying with your freaking thoughts because they are not facts. A fact might be, let's look at this. Let's say I get a new job. And let's say that I'm learning this new job. And if I'm struggling with low self esteem in this context, let's say I fuck up on my first day at work. If I have low self-esteem, I might say, I'm such a fuck up. I can't get anything right. I'm not meant to be in this job. I might have imposter syndrome kick in. Over identifying with my thoughts is going to solidify that as a fact. I shouldn't have this job. How am I going to build confidence? Don't deserve this. I'm not good enough for it. How do you think I'm going to feel then when I'm trying to learn the rest of my job? I'm going to feel like shit. I'm going to feel anxious. I'm going to feel like I can't do it. Okay. So getting stuck in that is then over identifying with this part of yourself that thinks that you're safer by not putting yourself out there. Versus if I didn't over identify with those thoughts, let's say, same thing, first day on the job, I fuck up. Maybe I have the thought, God, I'm such a fuck up. Okay. But if I don't over identify with it, If I recognize that as like, oh, that was kind of a shitty thought. Why did I say that to myself? I can say, okay, nope, I messed up this one thing. I'm learning. I need some time to figure this out. Let me use it as a challenge. Let me use it as a growth opportunity. Totally two different vibes, obviously, two different levels of self-esteem. Much easier said than done, but you can see how the first is going to solidify that version of yourself and the second is going to allow for more growth. So self-esteem is one of the biggest areas that we see this pop up in, and I think sometimes there's this like self protective factor of like, if I acknowledge that I'm a fuck up or I'm not worthy or I'm not good enough before anybody else is, then it won't hurt me as much. And this frustrates me because we say like, oh, it won't hurt me as much in the end. But instead of then getting hurt by maybe one person who doesn't know you to your core, thinking whatever they're going to think of you, instead of that one moment of hurt, you're hurting yourself every freaking day. You are making yourself feel like shit every single day to protect yourself, that again, brain trying to be efficient but not being very smart, that doesn't seem very helpful to me when we say it out loud like that. And again, I know this is easier said than done, and I'm kind of framing it in a lighter way because I want us to start to realize just how much power we have within ourselves that we are missing out on because we are getting sucked into this pattern of over identifying with our thoughts. Okay. So let's go into some other areas where this pops up. Relationships. So we might assume that maybe they're not texting us back because they don't like us, or maybe they are mad at us for not emptying the dishwasher because they think we are not good enough as a partner, right? So again, we have a thought, we have an insecurity pop in. And then what do we do with it? Do we latch onto it or do we challenge it, acknowledge it, and move forward another way? And then body image, fitness, motivation, all those types of things, right? So I have a thought of like, I'm just not, don't want to do it. Okay, well, if I gave in to every time I had the thought of I don't want to do it, I would do nothing. I would sit at home and I would read my books all day and I would not talk. Well, I would talk to people eventually, but I would literally do nothing on my to-do list and I would not feel productive. And in the end, I would feel like shit. So that's a really good example of these really common thoughts, even if you're not struggling with anxiety, depression, body image, those thoughts that you have of like, oh, I really don't want to do it. It'd be so much nicer to do XYZ thing today. Yep, but that's not a fact. That's not the reality of the situation. What do I need to look at of why I'm having that thought? Not overanalyze it, not over identify it, but look at it enough to be able to push through. Okay, so now let's talk about why we believe the noise. I've already alluded to this a little bit, but it is that efficiency. It's also tied to a desire for control. So again, the brain is going to latch on to things that make it feel efficient and make it feel in control. That self-protective part of us is kind of synonymous with making us feel in control because if I'm in control, I can protect myself, right? So when we have answers, we feel in control. If we don't have answers, we feel out of control. So that's a number one thing that we need to look at of in this moment when I say question like why am I having this thought? Not overanalyze it, but like am I having this thought because I'm longing for control? Am I having this thought because I have a desire for confidence? Am I having this thought because I'm really just nervous for the outcome? That's what we want to identify, not the ins and outs of like over analyzing the root cause of this thought in relation to your identity or your life or your mental health, but just a very straightforward, what am I lacking right now in my life that this thought is kind of pointing out for me? A lot of times it's wanting more control, wanting safety, wanting laziness, right? Like whatever it is, each category of thoughts has its own thing. Of course, past experiences, especially traumatic experiences, can be one of the reasons we believe these thoughts or we take these thoughts as facts. Trauma causes us to be so black and white. It's either this or this. Again, that is for safety purposes because whatever trauma we went through, we had to survive through. It's either this or this. If we think of maybe unsafe family dynamics, maybe we have some abuse within the household or even alcoholism or substance use within the household. The gray is too dangerous. I need to learn if this thing is going to upset the person or if this thing is going to keep me safe and I'm going to stand though I'm not going to test the waters in between. So any traumatic situation a lot of times kind of pushes us into that black or white thinking, which then our brain recognizes as efficiency and safety, and then it domino effects into everything else. So I think something to understand with this when it comes to trauma is let's say your trauma is maybe relational in nature. So an abusive relationship, a toxic relationship, something like that. It doesn't just stay in the bubble of relationships. That trauma does not only pop up then in similar relationships. It pops up in different relationships. So it could pop up in friendships, it could pop up in professional relationships. It's also going to pop up in other ways. So if I'm black and white in regards to safety and efficiency of my thoughts when it comes to relationships, well, what do you think it's going to be when it comes to trying new things? It's going to be black and white. Is this safe? Is it not? And that's going to be my answer versus kind of being able to navigate the gray. So traumatic experiences can absolutely have an effect on this and cause us to believe things that maybe are just thoughts that pop in our head as fact when they're just something to ignore and move on from. And that is something we need to rewire very intentionally and very safely. This is something that if trauma is the root cause of your difficulties with over identifying with your thoughts, please go to therapy, please talk to a professional or seek out professional resources because there's a reason your brain wants to keep you safe. There's a reason your brain has kind of latched onto these things and made it feel so intense for you. So this isn't something that you can just challenge kind of willy nilly if they do come from trauma, because there's a lot of wired things we got to unwire first. That's my disclaimer when it comes to traumatic challenging of these thoughts. But other kind of just maybe societal things, anxiety, perfectionism, depression, those types of things that maybe come from your environment, like circumstances that aren't necessarily traumatic or just the nature of human beings. Like I said, that thought of I don't want to do anything or the natural thought of what if, those are thoughts we can absolutely challenge on our own. And that anxiety, that perfectionism, those kind of heightened emotional responses are a huge reason why we fall into this trap because our emotions drive a lot of what we do. How many times have you had an emotion and acted on it without even thinking? Right. So sometimes it is the emotion comes first and then the thought kind of backs it up. So we have to be very in tune with our emotional reactions as well. Okay. Now I want you to look at how we can reframe this and challenge yourself. Instead of looking at it through the lens of you are the analyzer, you are the one who needs to figure it out. I want you to look at it through the lens of you are the observer. Even if you have to step out of yourself for a second and say, oh, my friend Jill is telling me that they're having this thought or she's having this thought. Okay, what would I observe about her situation there? Sometimes we have to take it out of ourselves because we're so caught up in what we're feeling and what we're thinking. But you are the observer, and then you're going to make a decision or a reaction based on that observation versus based on the emotion that comes with the thought. I want you to start to separate yourself from the thought, is essentially what I'm saying. You have thoughts, you are not your thoughts. It's the same thing we talk about with destigmatizing diagnosis. You might have ADHD, but you are not ADHD. That is not your whole identity, right? Your thoughts are something that happen. It just naturally pops up. That's like saying like, "Oh shit, my eye is twitching." Well, now I guess I'm an eye twitch. I mean, that's ridiculous, obviously, but it's kind of the same thing because it's a neurological, it's a biological response that we are now over identifying with. Another thing that I want you to try to do is label your thoughts. So in the sense of like, I'm noticing this thought. There's a lot of mindfulness that comes with these challenges. So I'm noticing that I'm having XYZ thought. We're looking at it as a statement written on paper, a sentence in a book. It is just something that is there. It is not attached to us, it is separate from us. Other things that are really helpful, and these come from mindfulness, meditation practices, is we want to look at thoughts as like something that is passing by. A cloud drifting by, a boat on the river drifting by, a car on the road driving by. It is something that comes and goes. And again, I think that's like a next step. Once you can start to identify I'm having a thought that I don't need to ascribe meaning to, then we can say, "Oh, yep, let's pause. There's a stop sign here for this car. We're checking you. Yep, okay, keep on going." That's what we kind of want to start to implement. And then my favorite way to deal with this is humor. I think that one of the best ways we can kind of challenge some of these things, especially if it's not in that category of trauma, especially if it's really not in that category of safety, true safety, is add some humor of like, that was a ridiculous thought, right? Like sometimes I'll be like, I really don't want to work out today. And then I will say to myself, like, okay, come on. Like, you got to do it. Like, that was the most ridiculous thought you've had all day. Just kind of poking fun at it to take the intensity away from the meaning that maybe has been ascribed to it in the past. It is okay to poke fun at thoughts that don't need to have meaning. It is okay to use humor in a situation where otherwise you might not think it's okay, or otherwise you might get so caught up in the emotion of it. Again, trauma and safety aside, that's kind of a separate category with this. But in these day to day thoughts that we're ascribing meaning to, it's okay to let them pass. It's okay to put some humor in the mix. It is okay to look at it as an observer versus an active participant. Okay. So we're going to wrap up here. I really hope that this hammered home for you the fact that your thoughts are not prophecies. You are not psychic. If you are, please let me know. That's extremely interesting. And I would love to chat with you about your experiences. But my guess is you are not. We need to start to look at our thoughts in that regard. And we need to start telling our brain, hey, brain, we're not actually psychic. This is just something that's passing through, and it's okay to let it go on. And we can build our trust in our gut that we will know the best thing to do when we need to handle the situation. So, your thoughts are not prophecies. They are not facts. They are not, your brain is not the CEO of every single detail that pops through across its desk. It's just data, it's just information. Sometimes it's not even information. Sometimes it's just, like I said, a neural pathway connecting and sending you a random thought. And I think that what we need to start doing is make the conscious and intentional choice to decide which thoughts am I going to engage with. You have so many freaking thoughts in a day. Think about if you interacted with every single thought you had every single day, the same way that you interact with some of these thoughts that we need to be challenging, you'd get nothing done. You'd sit there staring at a wall, trying to like sort through millions and millions of neural zaps every single day. So we need to start being more intentional. We also need to start giving more attention to the thoughts that are good. You end the day and you think about all the anxious thoughts you've had. That doesn't mean you didn't have any positive thoughts. And this is not me being toxically positive. I hate toxic positivity. I think it's not helpful. But what this is me doing is providing balance. If you're going to have a shitty thought, you got to have a good one too. They say in couples therapy, actually, I think this, I'm stealing this from Gottman and the work that they've done in kind of identifying how do we reduce tension in relationships. But they say that for every negative thing you say to your partner, you need 5 additional positive thoughts to make up for it, or 5 additional positive things to make up for it. The reason being is because negative shit sticks with us so much more than positive. And if you don't believe me, take a look at your day. And at the end of the day, I want you to reflect on the thoughts that you've had and think of how many positive thoughts that you've had versus negative. My guess is the negative is going to outweigh, especially if you're doom scrolling, especially if you're stressed at work or your inbox is going crazy. So we need to kind of provide that same comfort to our brains, ourselves. Of if I'm going to have a negative thought, well, let me have positive. I tell my clients all the time, if you're going to play the what if game, you got to play it right. If you're going to say, what if I'm late to work? Okay, what if this really bad thing happens? Okay, that's that side. Now the other side. What if I'm not late to work? What if I get there and I have a productive morning? We need to have the other side of the what if coin. What if this negative thing happens? Okay, but what if it doesn't? And what if this other positive thing does too? It's not toxic positivity. It is balance. Our brains need balance, and we need to teach our brains that positive thinking, or more realistic thinking, really is the bottom line of it, is more efficient than what ifs, than anxiety, than low self esteem. We need to rewire our brains to know that that is not efficiency, that is not safety, that is treating ourselves like shit. Okay. Anyway, thank you for listening to this episode and for letting me ramble on to you about something that I'm very passionate about. Clearly, I would absolutely love to hear how this episode resonated with you guys and what stood out to you guys with this. If there's any tools that you guys have, I listed very briefly just a couple. So I would love to hear if there's anything that you've found that works for you when you have either intrusive thoughts or just unhelpful thoughts. And yeah, just let me know what stands out, what's helpful. And I will be back next week with another new episode. All right, guys, see you then.